Great. Okay. Perfect. Thanks so much for your help, and sorry for the technical issues. You can go right to the next slide, please, Julie.
Yeah.
So I've been working, as Julie said, on the island of Kinmen for almost 20 years. My book came out in 10 years ago, and then it came out in Chinese in a Taiwanese edition about 5 years ago. I should also mention, because there are friends here from Taiwan, that my most recent book in English, The Art of Being Governed, will come out with Lianjing Chubanshe in next month in Taiwan. There will be a complex character edition, so please look for that. So in the time that I have been working on Kinmen, and more lately Kinmen and Matsu, of course, I am constantly facing the question: why are these two small archipelagos relevant? Why should anyone? I of course find them very interesting, but why should anyone find them interesting? And I want to today suggest that these islands are extremely useful for us to think about some of the implications of the rise of China. Next slide, please. As sorry, I'm just so it's still got me trying to show the show, so I'm seeing too many versions.
Okay, I hope everybody those can see the slide I'm showing.
Yes, no, you're fine. The problem was that I still had my slideshow showing, and so the slides weren't moving, of course. So I was getting confused, but I think I'm all set now. As it happens, so people are looking around the world for places that can give us some guidance into how the rise of China and the deteriorating US-China relationship are going to reshape the world in which we live. One place that a lot of scholars have focused on recently is Cambodia. Yuen Ang of the University of Michigan, actually, I saw her present earlier this week, and she described Southeast Asia, and particular Cambodia, as ground zero in the rise of China and the new US-China conflict, in the sense that it is a place, like many places in the world, where people are being forced to make choices, make binary choices that they would much rather not make. Next slide, please. And in one of the there are a couple of amazing coincidences that have happened in the last week or two, I'll share with you as we go along. One amazing coincidence is that just on the weekend, I saw David Shambaugh give a talk in which he described Cambodia as the new Finland. Next slide, please. For a long time, I have been arguing that the particular characteristics of Kinmen and Matsu. I'll use the term Kinmen, Matsu, and Kinma interchangeably here to refer to these offshore islands collectively. I've been long arguing that the particular characteristics of Kinma make it a useful place to think about larger problems. In other words, that we can think of them as a front line. In the past, I wrote about it, as Julie kindly said in her warm introduction, I wrote about Kinmen as a front line in the Cold War. In the last 20 years, Kinmen has become a different kind of front line of cross-straits relations. Today, I want to take the argument a little bit further and suggest that Kinmen and Matsu together are usefully thought of as a front line in the rise of China. And the reason I'm expanding that argument, and the reason I'm talking about Matsu, is I was able to visit Matsu and spend a short period of time there before the pandemic. But my good friend Lin Weiping, a wonderful anthropologist at National Taiwan University, has just published a great book about Matsu. And I've also made the acquaintance on social media of an influential Matsu politician, Li Wen, who I believe is here today, and it's my honor to have you here. I hope you will agree with my analysis and my interpretations. And where you don't, I hope you'll mention that in the Q&A. And I hope one day that we can meet in real life and not just in social media. But as a consequence of these two new kind of sources of information about Matsu, I've been rethinking what we can say about Jinma about the offshore islands as a front line. Next slide, please. The basic proposition that I want to make is a simple one today. China's rise, we often hear about China's rise and its implications for global geopolitics. And what I want to argue here today is that China's rise has implications not just for global geopolitics, but also for local politics, and particularly for the relationship between local politics, local politicians, local activists, and national politics. And I think that the offshore islands, as I hope to persuade you over the next 40 minutes or so, demonstrates this point really very clearly. One of the fundamental reasons for this is that the importance of local economic growth is distinctive for political actors at different levels. In the context of a rising China, integration with China across different dimensions is perceived as an important opportunity for economic growth. But integration in whatever form has implications for larger political relationships. And so what this means is that local issues, local politicians trying to drive the local economy forward, trying to find paths to local development, to local prosperity, even narrowly economic political ideas or political policy, even very narrow economic policies become embroiled in larger political issues. Next slide, please. So there's actually a branch of international relations theory that can help us get started on this developing and thinking through this proposition that I'm arguing here. And as it happens, the person most associated with this branch of IR theory is a scholar called Brantley Womack. I was speaking to Brantley earlier this week because I was telling him about how I was making use of his ideas as I was writing this talk. And he mentioned, oh, you must be speaking in Julie Chen's series. And it turns out, I guess, that Brantley was the last speaker in the series before the pandemic. So he got lucky, he was able to come to Finland, but another coincidence that I don't know what this says, that we have Yuan Fen, or I have Yuan Fen with this series. In any case, Womack was writing about China-Vietnam relations. And I'm sure I suppose that's probably what he spoke about when he visited your series a couple of years ago. But the basic point of asymmetry theory is not hard to make sense of. It is that disparities in strength and in capacity create differences in the interests and in the perceptions between the weaker and stronger parties to a bilateral relationship. So it's not just the case that in the relationship between China and Vietnam, you have two similar actors with different capacities. The stronger party can do things to the weaker party that the weaker party cannot do to the stronger party. The weaker party has a lot more to gain or to lose from the relationship than the stronger party. Each side tends to look at what is most important to it. The weaker side is vulnerable, so that it worries more about risk. The stronger side is not vulnerable, so it can focus on other strategic concerns. Next slide, please. Now, I want to be clear about a couple of things. I am not a political scientist, nor a theoretician, nor am I a policy expert. So the purpose of this presentation is not to develop asymmetry theory as a branch of international relations theory. I'll leave that to Brantley to do. It's also not really about how to manage an asymmetric relationship, although I will talk a little bit about some lessons I think can be drawn from the story. So this is not really, this is not intended as a kind of policy paper. Really what I'm just interested in doing as a historian and as someone who's very interested in this part of the world is to look at some of the consequences of this particular asymmetry, which is unique to the Taiwan Straits, but can be analogized to many, many parts of the world, to look at the consequences of this asymmetry for everyday local practice and explore whether there are any generalizations we can make. Now, there's an easy, but I think trivial objection to the argument that I'm building here, which is that Taiwan is unique. And I suppose, I mean, of course, Taiwan is unique. Every place is unique. It is also true that the rise of China is affecting virtually every region and every country of the globe, but China does not claim sovereignty over every region and every country of the world. The relationship between China and Finland does not have tremendous symbolic importance to China. A good relationship or a particular relationship with Finland does not have any real connection to domestic legitimacy in China. So there are obviously some distinctive elements here. But as I think you'll see, and as I'll try to highlight over the course of the presentation, there are, I think, many, many things that Jinma, the offshore islands, share in common with Taiwan, and many things that they share in common with other parts of the world. Next slide, please. So let me take a couple of minutes now, excuse me, and just give a brief introduction to Quemoy and Matsu. I hope if you're interested in this story, you might have a look at the book, either in English or in Chinese. The offshore islands of Taiwan, I'm not actually gonna run through I'm afraid, Julie, a longue durée history, as you had suggested I might. If these islands are totally unfamiliar to you, quickly jump over and Google them. That'll be easier than me giving a historical summary. But the basic point you need to know is that these are actually, Julie, maybe you could go back one slide. Excuse me. The basic point you need to know if you know nothing about these islands is that they are islands that are very, very close to the territory of the PRC, but in the case of Jinmen, just a couple of kilometers. And there's a famous episode in the 1970s of a Taiwanese soldier who actually swam from his post on Jinmen to Xiamen and was to return to the embrace of the motherland. And he went on to a very prominent career as an economist, indeed becoming the first Chinese chief economist of the World Bank. So they're very close to the territory of the PRC, but they remain under the control of the Republic of China on Taiwan. The reason for this is really a historical accident, as the forces of Chiang Kai-shek and the Republic of China were retreating to Taiwan in 1949 in the face of a series of communist victories, enormous victories that enabled the communist forces to take over the whole of the Chinese mainland that year and Hainan the following year. Two important things happened. The first is that the communist forces suffered a very surprising and unexpected military defeat at the Battle of Guningtou on Jinmen in mid-1949. And so the takeover of the islands was not as smooth as they expected. The plan was clearly for the PLA, as it was then called, to continue planning for an assault on these islands and eventually to take them over as soon as time was right. But then the Korean War intervened. The United States ordered the neutralization of the Taiwan Straits and said, of course, they would intervene if either side tried to take advantage of the situation and take military action. And this basically meant that Kinmen and Matsu were effectively protected by the American security guarantee. Once this happened in 1950, once that had happened, they became enormously symbolically important for the regime on Taiwan. And Chiang Kai-shek, who, of course, a lot of his legitimacy depended on his plan to retake the mainland, to undo the liberation of 1949 with a new liberation of Dalu Tongbao, the comrades on the mainland, invested huge military capacities on these islands. It's still a military secret, and I spend some time in the book trying to figure out the numbers. But in the 1950s, these two small islands with a population maybe of 40,000, 50,000, probably had on the order of 100 to 150,000 troops stationed there, between a third and a half of the total ROC army, because this was going to be the launching pad, the springboard from which eventually, when the time was right, Chiang Kai-shek and the forces of the Republic of China would reconquer the mainland. So now jump forward 2 slides, please. So my first book on Kinmen was really all about the ways in which this historical geopolitical accident and the militarization of the island by the ROC had all kinds of consequences for everyday life. And that's really what the book is about. This is just an example of how, so for reasons we don't need to get into, from 1958 to 1978 or 1979, I think, the PRC, the PLA would launch shells towards the island, would launch artillery shells towards the island on every alternate day. So every, if it was an even numbered day, like yesterday or tomorrow, there would be shelling. On an odd numbered day like today, there would be no shelling. And I just put this slide as an example of how this affected even something as simple as the rhythms of daily life. So mothers and children and everyone on Kinmen would spend every alternate night in a bomb shelter. Next shelter, please. Next slide, please. It affected the economy in profound ways. Kinmen people found lots of opportunities selling things to the troops, and there's this phenomenon of the Szonyi, which basically refers to businesses that are set up to sell things, to provide services to the soldiers. A phenomenal number. So even in the face of very, very difficult circumstances, the people of Kinmen become very entrepreneurial and they create businesses. Next slide. It even affected things like public health. What you see here is the so-called Granite Hospital, built in the 1970s. As far as I know, the only public hospital designed to withstand the direct impact of a nuclear bomb. And what this means is that the people of Kinmen could go and have their eye examinations or their physicals, or see pregnant women could see their OBGYNs, secure that they would not be in danger should a military bomb happen to be dropped on their heads. The interesting thing here is that this hospital is located about 10 kilometers from the city of Xiamen. The chances of a nuclear bomb ever being dropped by the PLA 10 miles from Xiamen was basically nil. So a lot of this was a propaganda exercise rather than something that was really about militarization. Next slide, please. From the 1950s to the 1980s, to me, the real interesting core issue in local politics, both in Kinmen and Matsu, was this issue of militarization. From the 1990s to the early 2000s, the issue shifted to one of democratization in Taiwan, of course, and changing and improving cross-straits relations. The end of the Cold War did not mean that geopolitics ceased to matter. Next slide, please. Demilitarization actually led to an economic crisis on the island. These are the G.I. Joe shops that I showed you a couple of slides ago, completely shuttered because as troops were removed from the island, the number of troops dropped from 100, 120,000 down to, I think now, just 2,000 or 3,000. Basically, the local economy collapsed. And the next slide, please. And what both the national and national and local authorities hoped was that two things would enable the local economy to recover from the effects of demilitarization. In other words, to chart a path forward. And those two things were tourism, and secondly, rising integration with the mainland, with China. Beginning in 2001, both governments on both sides of the Straits inaugurated the so-called three small links, which enabled people between the mainland and Taiwan via Kinmen and Matsu, whereas before they had to go to a third territory, typically Hong Kong. Today, and for a time, this did seem to present some possibilities for local development. Today, the big issue, that the big elephant that is shaping local politics is the rise of China. And of course, COVID, because Jinma, particularly vulnerable to the suspension of travel, the three small links, which fundamental to the local economy, were cut off. It became impossible to travel between the two places very early on in the pandemic. And as far as I know, Lee, when you can correct me, as far as I know, never restored. So in some previous work that I've published, next slide, please. In some previous work that I've published here in this book, I argued that because all of the leading possibilities for economic development on the islands in one way or another involved cross-straits integration, we could use conversations and debates about those possibilities as a window into what people think about cross-straits relations. Those of you who study Taiwan will know that actually there's probably no place in the world that gets more public opinion polls than Taiwan, and they don't actually change very much. Most people on Taiwan would like to be independent, but recognize that the status quo is the best option. That doesn't change very much. But what I was arguing was that we could use these various debates to look at what people really thought. But what I noticed as I was doing this was that because people basically want integration in ways that serve their interests, but their position on a particular aspect of integration, a particular policy that would lead to closer ties across the straits, doesn't necessarily reflect a larger view on integration. It really only reflects what people want to get economic advantage. That is, they want to be in a competitive advantage relative to other people, both in Taiwan and elsewhere. But promoting a particular policy or a particular way in which the two sides can be integrated was often interpreted by the media, by the national government, by China, as indicating a larger view favoring integration. In other words, ideas about economic policies were invariably politicized. So that when I was writing this essay for Mobile Horizons, which was 6 or 8 years ago, I was really only thinking in terms of Taiwan. What I want to do now is go beyond Taiwan and look at how these two archipelagos, the offshore islands, can tell us things about the broader world. So I'm going to do that with next slide, please, with a very quick discussion of three, I'm calling them cases, but they're not really cases. They're just really three stories I want to tell you. Next slide, please. So we'll talk first of all about the casino. So, and I should say that for all three of these stories, there's basically two parallel stories, one happening on Kinmen, one happening on Matsu. Sometimes the Kinmen story is earlier, sometimes the Matsu story is earlier, but all three of these stories have parallels back and forth. And this actually suggests to me that there is something here that is a broader, more generalizable possibility. So in 2009, the Legislative Yuan of the Republic of China legalized passed an act called, it was called the Development Act, but it legalized gambling on the offshore islands. It was one of a whole slate of possibilities that were authorized as ways of building the local economy. And as soon as this happened, next slide, please. Global capital marched in. This fellow is Mr. Widener of the Widener United Development Corporation, one of the leading casino development corporations and the public corporations in the world, involved, not necessarily involved, but responsible, sorry, not necessarily responsible, but involved in casino developments that you're all familiar with, like Marine Bay and Sentosa and stuff like that. Next slide. And they put together this wonderful package showing how the offshore islands, he tried to build casinos in both Kinmen and Matsu. This is from Lin Weiping's book, The Asian Mediterranean, that he proposed that Matsu could become if they could build a casino. So there was a big local debate that happened in both places for a couple of years. It was, in some ways, a kind of typical development debate. It looked a lot like the development debates. We have a casino down the road from me, and it's in some ways the debates here in Boston, and in some ways the debates were actually quite similar in Kinmen and Matsu as they are here in Boston. What are the costs? What are the benefits? The next, please, go ahead. The issue is, of course, that the risks are shared by everyone, but sometimes the benefits only go to a few people. The local Green Party said that the casino would be a cesspool for corruption, lots of concern over who was going to benefit. Next slide, please. So the magistrate of Kinmen saying, the translation is actually a little less colorful and vivid than what he actually said. He's really saying, if we get this casino, it's not going to help my people. They're just going to be, doing chores and washing dishes. Again, very much, at some levels, very similar to debates that we see about gambling anywhere. But in some ways, it was also a proxy for debates about the relationship between these places and the mainland. So people were not just talking about what it would mean to have a casino. They were actually thinking about what it meant for their relationship and the relationship of Taiwan with the mainland. So again, these debates were politicized. There were, next slide, please. There were local referenda, right? This is something distinctive to, or different than, for example, say Macau. There were referenda in referendums in 2012. A popular referendum in Kinmen was defeated. The people voted and said no casino. In 2012, the people in Matsu said yes to the casino, and the debate kind of simmered along for a couple of years until 2015, when China weighed in. Next slide, please. So you just saw Zhang Jujun of the Taiwan Affairs Office, the central agency in Beijing that's responsible for handling affairs with Taiwan. And basically, as you can see, he said there is no way there can be gambling. You can't have a casino on Kinmen, and if you do, we will effectively blockade you. The three small links is crucial to the economic viability of the island, the livelihood of so many of its people. Why did he say this? Well, of course, you know, they don't take my interviews at the Taiwan Affairs Office. I do actually have quite a good relationship with some people there, but one of the reasons I have a good relationship is I don't ask too many sensitive questions. Two possibilities. One is that this had something to do with concerns about Hong Kong and about Macau in particular, about Macau becoming prosperous in relation to Hong Kong or something else. The other possibility, which I think is more likely, this is 2015, of course, and if we were all in person, I would ask you what the other factor was, but since we're on Zoom, that's not as convenient. The other possibility, of course, is this was linked to anti-corruption, right? That casinos are famous places for money laundering, and the concern was that if there was a casino on Kinmen or on Matsu, local Chinese officials would take the ferry and launder their corrupt gains there. Next slide, please. But the interesting thing from my perspective, or from the perspective of this story, is that basically sealed the fate of casinos on the islands. Mr. Widener announced that he was pulling out, that global capital was not interested in investing. He didn't, of course, cite this intervention from the mainland. He said it was because there wasn't enough support from the central government in Taiwan. So what are the lessons? And that's the end of the casino story. Again, Li Wen, who follows these things very closely and lives on Matsu, I'd love to hear if there's an update. But you can tell me later, or you can tell me in the chat if it's an interesting in the Q&A if it's an interesting update. So in her book that I just referenced, Island Fantasia, Lin Wei-ping has a lovely chapter about how this episode of the casino, how this became, how people in Matsu developed what she calls imaginaries, that is, ideas about a brilliant future based on the casino. I'm more of a materialist. I found that very interesting, but I'm going to actually, rather than focus, and so for her, the whole experience was in some ways a positive because it led Kinmen and Matsu people to think about their future in creative new ways. But what strikes me from it is that it's actually a great indicator of the kinds of things that Brantley Womack was talking about in asymmetry theory. So the stronger party cares about different things than the weaker party, and it cares about things that have nothing to do with the relationship. So no one on Kinmen or Matsu was thinking about anti-corruption, but it was actually anti-corruption that shut the possibility down. And in a sense, this makes the weaker party even more vulnerable because it has to anticipate the strategic priorities of the stronger party. Can you imagine if they had broken ground and invested and started building the casino and invested local resources in the casino and then been told, no, this isn't going to happen? Okay, is this a unique story? I don't think it's a unique story. I think if you look at a lot of BRI projects, if you look in particular at some failed BRI projects, if you look even more specifically at BRI projects involving coal-fired energy plants, which were part of the BRI and have now been removed from the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, there are some really striking parallels here. Of course, not exactly the same, but I think still very useful. Okay, let's move on to the second kind of case. And here I really just, again, I've cited Li Wen a couple of times, but my attention was drawn to this issue by reading his statements on the matter, and if you follow Lee's work, you'll see that my argument here, the first part of my argument, very much based on material that I learned from him. Next slide, please. So there is a serious problem of overfishing of squid off in the waters off Matsu. It's overfishing by by fishermen from the mainland. Here you see the lights of their boats. This is a photo taken, I think this is from a Reuters article, taken off the coast of Matsu, and you can see the whole horizon is squid boats. Squid fishing is very environmentally destructive. There's a lot of bycatch. I don't know the details, but there's a lot of bycatch, so a lot of wasted fish. And the lights of the squid fishing boats may actually be affecting the reproductive mechanisms of other fish species. There's also, next slide, please. There's also a particular damage that it causes. This extraordinary photograph is not retouched. This is a local environmental phenomenon called, they call it in Chinese, the blue tears. It's caused by a particular kind of algae, a bioluminescent algae called the dinoflagellate. That, next slide, please. That creates at certain times of year this bioluminescence, which is absolutely, I mean, I've never seen it. I would very much like to see it, but everyone says that it's absolutely stunning, and it's a huge tourist draw. People fly to Matsu specifically to see this. As you can imagine, this is a very sensitive, environmentally a very sensitive thing. It is very adversely affected by the squid fishing. As you can imagine, all of these lights all of the lights of the squid fishing boats have a very negative effect on the local tourism industry. Next slide, please. Another serious environmental challenge being faced by Matsu is illegal sand dredging. So boats come over from China and they put these giant pipes down to the ocean floor and just suck up sand, which they then take back to the mainland to use for construction projects. There was a big series by Reuters on this, and it seems like that a lot of this sand actually ends up being land reclamation in Wenzhou. They actually trace the ships coming to Matsu, filling up with sand, and then going back and building Wenzhou. This is actually an intercepted sand-dredger. The Taiwanese Coast Guard has caught this sand-dredger and forced it to come back and release the sand that it's illegally captured or sucked up. You might think that this is not such a big deal. How much sand can one ship take? Next slide, please. But we're not talking about a small scale. So these are all illegal sand dredgers at one moment, basically sucking up the resources of Matsu. And here's an even more striking image. I hope it will show up okay. Next slide, please. So this is satellite imagery of sand dredgers off Matsu. This is from Reuters approximately a year ago. All right, so what to do about these environmental challenges? Well, the reality is that lots of environmental issues cross political borders. Anyone who cares anything about the environment knows that the regulatory regimes that we have in place to handle environmental challenges are not adequate to deal with those challenges. But there are some distinctive features because of the connection with China. And here's Li Wen's account of this, and I think he's absolutely right. So these are not government squid fishermen. These are not government sand dredgers. These are private businesses. But responding to these private entrepreneurs and private businessmen, demands a state response. Because if the state doesn't respond, if the Taiwanese Coast Guard says, yeah, take the sand, you're just private businesses, then the environmental destruction, the environmental consequences will be enormous. But as Li Wen says here, and this is why I put this quotation here. By the way, I've spoken in the past about political activism. This is the first time I've ever had political activists in the room with me. So this is another kind of strange new world that we live in. I'll be curious to hear how people react to the fact that the person I'm using here as evidence is actually present. But anyways, Li Wen has it exactly right, that trying to stop the environmental challenges is actually risky because it's politicized. It could be seen as provocative to the larger relationship. I'll only add one comment to his you can, next slide, please. So, I mean, this is sort of, as a historian, as a scholar, this would be my rephrasing of Li Wen's comment here, which is that local concerns are subsumed within the larger political relationship. I also think that this may be a kind of psychological or gray zone warfare, excuse me, in the sense of tactics that are used to intimidate and harass and wear down a weaker opponent, and thereby undermine the long-term commitment to defense of one's interests. Next slide. I put this in brackets because initially I thought, well, here is something that really does seem unique to this region. Next slide, please. But then it occurred to me, isn't this very similar to what is going on in the South China Sea? Where similarly, private fishing interests, merchant marine are generating pressure on local governments, but it's pressure at the level below direct military confrontation. So the more I thought about it, actually, the less I felt that this was actually unique. All right, third case, because we're running out of time and I should wrap up in a couple of minutes. Next slide, please. So China has been promoting tighter ties between the offshore islands and China and the mainland in aid of the larger goal of unification for many years. There is a plan for Cross-Strait integrated development, which is intended to serve this goal. It's often, well, it's not often forgotten. Most people don't really pay much attention to this, but I do. Xi Jinping, of course, was stationed in this region for much of the middle part of his career. He was the mayor of Xiamen, the governor of Fujian, and so on. And he's actually been promoting a tunnel or a bridge linking the offshore islands and the mainland since 2002. And in 2019, he announced what he called the 4 new links to promote connectivity wherever necessary between Kinmen and Matsu and the mainland in water, electricity, gas, land travel, and so on. So it's not just me who thinks these islands are significant, so does Xi Jinping. And you can ignore what I think, but if Xi Jinping thinks somewhere is important, that's actually pretty meaningful. So here too, there are parallel debates between the two offshore islands, Kinmen and Matsu. In Kinmen, talks began about a little over a decade ago to import water to meet rising demand for fresh water. In 2015, there was an agreement signed about building a pipeline to ship fresh water from the mainland to Kinmen. Next slide, please. And the idea was, of course, the idea was that having more fresh water would enable economic development in different ways. One thing that you may not know is that tourism uses a lot of water. And so if you want to build up a tourism business, and if you think about it, if you've been a tourist, you can see why. But if you want to develop your tourism industry, you need a lot of fresh water, not just for drinking, but for all the laundry and all the restaurants and so on. So this seemed like a good plan if Jinmen was going to, and of course there were also hopes that for other kinds of industrial development. The hope was that with the risk, with water shortages eliminated as a risk, this would spur local economic development. Next slide, please. But of course, because of the particularities of the situation, even what seemed like a local economic development policy had security implications. And so the Ministry of Economics in Taiwan had to look into whether this was a national security issue. In the end, they decided that it wasn't. But the mere fact that they had to consider this issue shows some of the ways in which economic relations are politicized. Next slide, please. So on both Jinmen and more recently on Matsu, local activists got involved, local environmentalists got involved and said, look, the issue is not just one of national security. It's also a threat to the environment. How will we know? It's possibly a threat to our health, because how do we guarantee the quality of the water that's being shipped? It opens us up to the possibility of coercion, because what happens if we build a pipeline and the flow of water is cut off? Environmental activists on Jinmen, this is a debate with which I'm more familiar than the debate on Matsu. Environmental activists on Jinmen get accused, when they say these things, of threatening the Cross-Straits relationship. So the idea that you should protect your local environment, the idea that you should have a plan for tourism development rather than just say the more tourists, the better, this is seen as not just wrong, but dangerous. And they're criticized for dangerous views. Matsu, the debate happens a little bit later. No, stay where you are, please, Julie. Matsu, the debate happens. No, go back, please. Sorry. It's a slight. Thanks so much. You're doing a great job. It's a slightly different debate, because the islands of Matsu are so much more scattered. And so if you think about how you would supply fresh water from the mainland to Matsu, it would be, well, you can't see my cursor, but you can see you would need an enormous investment. Would you have one pipeline or 4 pipelines or linked pipelines? The only real water shortage on Matsu, by the way, is on Dongju Island, which is the farthest island away. So the real issue, and here again, this is Li Wen, who has made a couple of really helpful and very bold interventions on this issue. The real issue is not should we build a pipeline, but how do we make effective use of water resources? And his point, with which, I mean, I'm looking at these debates from the outside perspective, so actually what I think doesn't really matter, but what he says makes a lot of sense to me. We should decide the future of Matsu's water supply on non-political grounds. What is the water capacity of the islands? What is the capacity of our desalination plants? What are the relative costs of different approaches? And also, what should we do about conservation? These are all very, very useful perspectives. But next slide, please. But this cannot be divorced from the larger political context. And here we've got another spokesman from the Taiwan Affairs Office, basically saying, look, the lesson of all of this is that only if cross-straits relations are good are the lives of people on Taiwan going to get better. When his statement here was developed in the PRC media, the message was, look, this drought in Taiwan and the offshore islands, the drought was much more severe on Taiwan than on the offshore islands, but really what this drought shows you is the failure of DPP governance, that this shows you that Taiwan has a bad government. And if you unify, if the two sides unify, then you will have good government. So this is another example of the larger phenomenon that I'm showing, which is the politicization of local politics. Next slide, please. So the news is not all bad here. This is the magistrate of Kinmen. I interviewed him a couple of years ago. I can't remember. At one of my interviews with him, he said we were, he could tell where I was coming from this, and he could tell my position with which he did not agree. And he said, look, it's not. He didn't use the phrase "weapons of the week," but he said, look, it's not all bad. If I'm having trouble with some ministry in Taipei now, I can call the Taiwan Affairs Office in Beijing, and the Taiwan Affairs Office in Beijing can then say, you better do this or else. And so he actually feels that he actually has some resources that he wouldn't otherwise have. Next slide, please. Julie, I realize I'm a couple of minutes over time. I'm going to finish up in 2 or 3 minutes. So here again, the lessons. Even local projects have national security implications. And this challenges the possibility of building alliances, because environmental activists and local tourism officials have a hard time working together, because the politicization of these policies naturally drives a wedge between them. It makes it hard to, and in fact, the PRC has a long history, or the CCP has a long history of exploiting divisions within an opponent's forces. They actually have a word for it. It's called the United Front. So what we're seeing here, I think, is Tongzhan applied to the Taiwan case. Okay, a couple of final lessons and conclusions before we stop. Thank you, Julie. Next slide, please. When all problems, even local economic development problems, become political and even geopolitical issues, some things happen. Here are just a couple of them. I'll expand on that a little bit. Claims for other values, like the environment, become challenged. Even local issues like how much squid gets fished up are securitized. The weaker party's vulnerability is enhanced. In some, the changes or the different kinds of political relationships complicate local autonomy. I haven't really talked about this today, and actually maybe for reasons of time, I will not. It creates new kinds of complexities in the relationship between local politicians and national politicians, especially in democracies where local politicians are typically elected on the basis, they're re-elected on the basis of economic performance, they're elected on the basis of what they can do for the economy. And so they are incentivized to think in terms of short-term economic gains. The PRC is able to exploit this for long-term political advantage. And as I said, I don't want to get into too much detail, but I could tell you a story of how all of these stories have created conflicts and tension between the government of the offshore islands and the central government in Taiwan. And in a sort of weird way, the Chinese government jumps into these conversations and says, look, this shows you that the national government doesn't care about the well-being of the people. This, as I said, I started off saying I wasn't going to try to contribute to IR theory, but I think, and I don't know if Brantley's here, but if any IR specialists are here, I think this might be a new contribution to asymmetry theory. I don't know. Okay, what are the lessons that this gives the people of these societies? I'm not actually sure that this offers direct lessons, except that an awareness of these issues may be helpful. Activists need to distinguish their immediate interests from the larger relationship and articulate that difference. They need to find ways to demonstrate that the local interests they care about are not a challenge to the larger relationship. They need to predict strategic shifts in the larger party. They need to ask themselves, is it possible, and this was my point about the weapons of the week, is it possible to leverage the complexities of the larger relationship to get local benefits? Next slide, please, which is the last slide. I think that the cases that I have shared with you today are a more extreme version of the challenges facing other places in the region and even beyond. The challenge of reconciling economic opportunities with the downsides and risks of economic, political integration and subordination. The pressures that face Kinmen today, I have argued, are structurally very similar to the pressures facing other places as a result of the rise of China. So I don't disagree with Li Wen's statement here, but I would go beyond it and say that Kinmen is a kind of bellwether, a beta testing ground, not just for Taiwan, but for everywhere. Asymmetry is going to be more and more true of more and more places in Asia and around the world as China's rise continues. And so we will all be facing these questions in the future. All right. That is what I have to share with you today, and I'd be happy to get your reaction and your feedback and your questions.